All right. Last but not least, let's talk about the resistance. Not everybody turns to ag. Okay. In the text, it gives you a couple of different examples. We're going to focus on the main resistance, and that is the pastoralists. These are the nomads. These are the cattle and horse herders. So, what is pastoral life like? Well, pastoralists, thanks to the unyielding march of agriculture, have been pushed into areas where farming is just flat out unsuitable, whether it's because of climate, whether because of soil conditions, whether because of geographic conditions. They dominate the areas where farming isn't really efficient. Because if they live in an area where farming is efficient, the ag society is going to show up and eventually push them out of the way. Also, these pastoralists are nomadic. They depend on animal products. The animal is their lifeblood. They depend on it for clothing. They depend on it for materials. They depend on it for housing. They depend on it for transportation, food, milk, all of the products of their daily life. So the animals must be taken care of. And in order to take care of large numbers of them, you must constantly relocate for pasture. Um, now, well, that doesn't sound very fun. I think I'd rather live in a house and have lots of cool stuff and, eat bread. Maybe, but the pastoralists do have some advantages. A lot of that social and political equality that we just talked about eroding on the last slide, a lot of that is retained by pastoralist societies because women's roles aren't relegated to the house or the home or the tent or wherever it is. Women still retain very high positions in these societies because their jobs are still seen as integral to survival. Um, so these pastoralists, even though they are nomadic, they do keep close relationships with their ag neighbors. Sometimes those relationships are peaceful, sometimes they are not peaceful. When we get to talking about classical Asia and specifically China, we will talk about how China manages their pastoral nomadic neighbors. And again, you'll see sometimes it's a good relationship, and other times it's a pretty one-sided and terrible relationship. What else? Pastoralists, they don't work as much. They don't practice agriculture. They herd animals. This leaves time, free time. That free time allows them to focus on cultural development. Music becomes a big part of life. The arts. Unfortunately, usually no written language because without large scale cities that need laws and government, you tend not to need to write that much down. However, technologically, these nomadic pastoralists produce a lot of very important technologies. These are not backwards people living out in the countryside, the typical country bumpkin type stereotype. Just a couple of the things that come out of pastoral societies: the horse and the camel saddle. I mean, this one should be obvious. These people are nomadic and they herd animals. So naturally, they would be the ones to develop the saddle first. Stirrups, which are added to horse saddles a couple thousand years after its first development. The composite bow, which is a massive improvement over the traditional bow and arrow. It's made with two pieces and it has a lot more reflex. It can be fired a lot longer distances. When we talk about the Mongols, you're going to see the impact of the composite bow. Pastoral peoples are the first to develop chariots. Again, this should be pretty common sense that, things associated with constant travel, well, they're going to come from people who constantly travel. And last but not least, iron tools. Central Asian nomads are the first to develop iron. And they are the ones who pass it on to the Chinese early on in Chinese history. And the Chinese take that and run with it. But one thing you got to remember about these pastoralists is for all of the good stuff about their society, they do still depend on ag societies for manufactured goods. This is usually where the conflict between ag and pastoral societies come from, is those pastoral societies, for all of the wonderfulness, they still see the wealth of their settled neighbors and they want it. Sometimes they trade for it peacefully, other times they raid for it violently. And that's going to become, a major source of conflict between these two completely different lifestyles. So that is it for Unit 2. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with Unit 3 next week. We're going to talk about the early states, right? Mesopotamia, Egypt, Indus River, right? The first people who take this agricultural bounty that we have and build it into a massive civilization.